If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Jason Rosenbaum, the co-host of the Politically Speaking podcast, and this is the 200th episode that features a guest. Naturally, we're very excited about this milestone, and we're doing something a little bit special. If you look in the interior of the posts for this podcast, you'll find a link to a 25-question quiz. It's a pretty difficult quiz because the top 3 answer goers, so to speak, will get their choice of either a tote bag, a blanket, or a mug. What it deals with is not only the amount of certain types of guests, but also obscure Easter eggs and also the bumper music to this show. We didn't want this to be a particularly easy quiz because we don't want to give everybody who takes it a tote bag, a blanket, or a mug. So I hope you've been paying attention all these years, because if you have been, you're going to be handsomely rewarded. On behalf of myself and Joe Mannies, thank you for making this show the longest episodic podcast that deals with Missouri politics. And now we feature our guest, State Senator Scott Sifton, on the latest edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I think that is fair to say.
Hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today is
Joe Mannies
and our special guest,
State Senator Scott Sifton.
Joining us for the 4th time, by the way.
I believe so.
We will get to why that's significant at the end of the show.
No, we're not on the air.
Not on the air. Thank you for coming in today. For our listeners, give us a sense of what your district is.
Well, and forgive me, I came here directly from the funeral for Officer Blake Snyder, so at least at this point, unfortunately, the 1st Senate District is marked by tragedy. The Officer Snyder was shot and killed last week in Green Park, which is in the district. As many folks might have seen, we actually have a former state representative who lives right across the street from where it happened. And have to say, between the vigil last week, the visitation last night at Cudis there on Gravois, the procession this morning in Afton, and the services in Chesterfield, just awed by the outpouring of support for Officer Snyder and his family. He leaves behind a wife, a son, a brother, and actually a brother-in-law who serves and as well, and eulogized his brother-in-law and mentioned how he had told him that he wrote a hymn. His brother-in-law had written a hymn for fallen officers, and rued the day that he would ever actually have to say it. And of course, it turned out that today was that day. Mm-hmm. And the first time that he would say it was for his brother-in-law. Grateful for the support of the community, grateful for groups like the Backstoppers that help families of fallen law enforcement officers at times like this, and going forward. I just hope that moving forward from this, hopefully we can avoid senseless tragedies like this going forward.
Well, I appreciate.
Very, very, very sad.
It's very sad. I appreciate you saying that, because I have I appreciate you saying that. I know that a lot of people with the St. Louis County Police Department have had a rough week or two.
Yes,
to put it mildly.
Well, to have the presidential debate come in the middle of all this, which is pretty much an all-hands-on-deck experience for law enforcement as well, between the death last week and everything this week, it's just been a lot of officers in St. Louis County that haven't had a lot of sleep.
So our hearts go out to Officer Snyder's family and to everybody with the St. Louis County Police Department over this tragedy. We brought Senator Sifton in because the 1st Senatorial District, which takes in, I would say, most of South St. Louis County that's unincorporated, Webster Groves, Brentwood, a number of other municipalities, I guess, in South Central St. Louis. It's going to be one of the most competitive state Senate races in the state, kind of by default. There aren't that many. There's one in Columbia. There may be one in the Kansas City area. But this is definitely the most competitive legislative race in the St. Louis region, through no fault of your own, by the way. It's just the nature of how the district is drawn.
Yeah. This district is one in which no candidate of either party has won as much as 51% of the vote yet this century, and it would be different if there had ever been third-party candidates. It's always been one Democrat and one Republican, with the winner getting 50% plus and the loser getting 49% plus.
So,
and just so our listeners know that if you're listening to this, we have already recorded a separate show with the Republican, Dr. Randy Jotty, and that will be running that's running separately, but just so you know, well, when you hear this, we've already done it, so the two gentlemen have not heard each other, so they don't know what the other one said.
So we wanted to give the people of the 1st District a sense of who these candidates are and what they'll fight for in the Missouri Senate. We've had you on the show before, but for people that don't follow state politics that closely or may not even know that you're the 1st District State Senator, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into politics.
Sure. Well, I'm a Kansas City transplant, came to St. Louis almost 20 years ago following law school, and got involved in the community right away. Started as the mock trial attorney coach for the Afton High mock trial team, and the school district was in the process of trying to pull together resources to upgrade facilities and help their teachers. I got involved in that effort, and the school board president at the time, who's a Republican, nonpartisan office, but he's a Republican, had worked with me on that, and he happened to be the only lawyer on the board as well, and his predecessor had been one also, and he approached me and asked me to run for his seat, mentioned he was going to be leaving the board, and as it turns out, actually wound up in the Bush administration. I think he was Undersecretary of Treasury by the time President Bush left office.
Wow.
In any event, so I ran for the school board and served for 9 years in that role, including a couple terms as board president. Afton schools did really well during those years. They've done even better since. It's been wonderful to see how that school district has done. And then following that, I was at a little bit of a crossroads and decided, with Representative Pat Yeager being term limited from the Missouri House, received encouragement to run for that seat. I did, and I won in 2010, a year that wasn't exactly a banner year for Democrats.
If I'm not mistaken, though, didn't you run for state representative before 2010, too?
I had an 2002, yes.
Yeah, so,
yes.
And you were unsuccessful in that contest, but and I think I've asked you this before, but one of the things I've seen in Missouri politics is people learn from races that they lose. Did you learn anything from that contest that made you more successful in subsequent years?
Learned a lot. I mean, there are folks in all sorts of offices in the state who will talk about a race that they lost that helped get them where they are, if you will. I'm thinking of a particular statewide office holder who's about to leave office, but in any event. Learned a lot. Learned a lot about the community. Learned a lot about just the sort of blocking and tackling of going door to door and meeting with voters and hearing about concerns from folks. And of course, the more of that you do, the more you listen to people, the more you hear what the community that you're in really thinks about the issues. It also helps to inform your own views. And I can say that over the time that I've been involved, my views are considerably more, I wouldn't say nuanced, but considerably better informed today than they were at that time. And that's frankly because I've had thousands of conversations with thousands of people over the time that I've been involved.
Now, what's interesting is that you had defeated Republican Jim Lemke, who had been one of the rebel-rousers in the Senate on the Republican side.
Rabble-rouser is a good word for
yes,
it.
and I mean
no
that,
such formal caucus.
And I mean that in a respective sense. Well, in the last few sessions, especially at the end, you often have played a similar role, although your personality is different, on the Democratic side, as far as leading or being key figures in certain filibusters to block key pieces of legislation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
There are three kinds of issues that we take up in the Missouri Senate. We take up issues where sometimes with a lot of work, consensus can be achieved, and a lot of those bills will come to a vote, and the vote will be 34-0 or 32-2 or 30-4. We also have issues where consensus can't be achieved, but compromise can. And sometimes that's along a party line basis. As often as not, some of the compromises we reach are between members of the majority party. And then there are the issues where, try as though we might, we cannot reach consensus and we cannot reach compromise. And again, sometimes those are partisan issues. More often than not, I would say they tend to be regional issues. But the question at those times is to make sure, look, we're not going to get we're not going to get to an agreement on right to work. We're just not. We may. I mean, try as though we might, it's just not going to happen. There just aren't any pliable votes on that issue, Democratic or Republican. And that's one example. We weren't going to get to an agreement this year on whether discrimination against same-sex couples should be legal in Missouri. We just weren't going to get to agreement or compromise. The key for the body, and this might be where I differ from rabble-rousers, the key for the body is to make sure that when we can't at least find a way to agree to disagree, that the functionality of the body and the integrity of how the Senate is meant to function is preserved and kept intact.
Now, just a piece of history here. The Missouri Senate, as the Missouri House, is heavily populated by Republicans, and they hold veto-proof majorities in both chambers.
On most issues.
Yeah, on most issues. So especially in the state Senate, it often a controversial measure, if it gets through the House, it falls on this small group of Democrats, if the Democrats are against the bill, to sort of block it. And so you're one of the key leaders of that.
Well, or sometimes on a small group of Republicans to block it, depending on the issue. I mean, take an issue like prescription drug monitoring.
Right.
Okay.
I think that might actually pass 33-1. If not, it would be 31-3. But we've not been able to get to compromise on that issue either, and that's not because of Democrats. So it depends on the issue.
Right.
But the point is, we need, in my view, I think it is important for all parties, for our constituencies, and for the state to do all we can to try to find, if not common ground, at least ground upon which we can agree to disagree. That's not always possible. We work to try to keep the instances where that's the case rare. But the real question is, at some point, if might makes right, what are going to be the ramifications of that for every other issue we take up? And I would argue that how we handle that is actually maybe more important than how we handle any one issue, no matter how important it is.
Well, that was going to be my question, because there was, I believe, a 7 or 8 year period in the Missouri Senate where they did not forcibly stop filibusters. It's commonly known as calling the previous question, and basically what that does is stop a filibuster. And in the last 3 or 4 years, it's become increasingly common. In fact, this last veto session, I think it was used twice.
Yep.
So that has to be very disconcerting for Democrats like you, or Democrats like Jill Shoup, or Democrats like Stephen Weber, if he wins his race, that you guys basically, as a collective, spend literally millions of dollars to try to turn these previously Republican seats blue, only to come into a chamber where arguably you have less power over controversial issues than before. I'd like to get your perspective on that, because it seems like people in caucuses that were even smaller than yours had more power to stop things than you do now.
The previous, well, I would actually disagree with that. I think we still have that power, and I think we demonstrated it this year with SGR 39, even though there was a PQ of that issue. Mm-hmm. The way it happened was such that even though SGR 39 survived the first round, it was mortally wounded going forward.
Fair
and
enough.
The business community had time to galvanize against it, and the House found a way to make it go away.
Yes.
But of the 5 times the previous question has been used, 3 were in veto session. And I have to say, and I said this after the first time it happened, I don't think veto session is the place to be filibustering. I mean, and look, the two issues that drew previous questions this year, I disagreed as strongly as any Democrat with those bills. We're talking about the gun bill and the voter ID bill. But if we were going to filibuster those bills with the intent of killing them, that should have happened in regular session. And to be sure, there was a lot of discussion about those
Didn't you filibuster the 72-hour waiting period during veto session?
That was done. And I will tell you, the only thing that made that situation different, and it was a lesson learned in hindsight for, I think, everybody on both sides of the aisle, the only reason that was done is because the Republicans were going to lose the votes at 6 a.m. And the issue was forced, and because of, frankly, the way that issue had come to get that far in the process, there were members of my caucus who felt strongly that they needed to die on the sword. And I'll say this, and I'll say this to Democrats. I don't think veto session is the place to go dying on the sword. I mean, those three issues were all issues that were part of discussions in regular session. And even though probably nobody on either side liked the final resolution, that's not a reason to go trying to scuttle the deal on the back end in veto session. The other two issues we've had previous question motions on were SJR 39, which didn't pass into law, and right to work, which didn't pass into law.
Yeah.
I think it's a very different thing if you see a change in law as a result of a previous question in regular session. We have not seen that on my watch. And so from that standpoint, I could argue that even though it has been tested, the proper functioning of the Senate has not been irrevocably altered at this point.
I want to talk about right to work, which is shorthand for a policy that would bar unionized entities from forcing employees to pay union dues if that entity has agreed to organize. I believe I got that description correctly.
Well, I would say it's shorthand for paying people less and not just unionized workers. I mean, states that are right to work pay on average 15% less than states that don't.
Right, but I was just the term right to work often gets thrown around a lot without people explaining actually what it does.
Exactly.
And it's a very clinical explanation. Unfortunately, that's very wordy, but it's important to explain. So it's actually a really important issue in your district.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of people who either were members of organized labor or are members of organized labor. I know that your opponent in 2012, Jim Lemke, was opposed to right to work, even as a Republican.
Yes.
And I just want to get a sense of how important you think it is in this particular contest.
Well, let's not make any mistake about it. What voters do in the 1st District on November 8th, and we're talking about a district where less than 1 out of 100 voters have decided each of the last 3 races in this seat. The decision that voters make in this race will very likely determine whether this is a right-to-work state or whether we continue to be a state where we have, frankly, better wage earning powers for working families than right-to-work states do. And so, if you are a working family living paycheck to paycheck, trying to make it on a month-to-month basis, scraping by, whether you belong to a union or not. How you vote in this race should be very well informed by whether you want your wages to go down.
And I want to explain why that's the case. And this is the case even if Koster becomes governor. If you looked at the vote total in the Senate on right to work, I believe it was, 21 Republicans voted for it? Maybe 20? I don't remember.
I think actually it's higher than that now.
Okay. Since Bill Eigel won his seat, and he's favored to win his race, he replaces somebody who was opposed to right to work in Tom
And he's
Dempsey.
in St. Charles.
He's in St. Charles. If for some reason you lose, and we haven't talked to Randy Jotty yet, but if he is for right to work, you have the 23 to override a veto, basically. But,
and that's true of the Columbia seat as well. Yes.
And that's true of the Columbia seat as well. But that I just wanted to explain to our listeners what he was talking about.
Yeah, and make no mistake about it, because I've seen it happen, even with junior and freshman Republicans who claim to be labor-friendly coming in. As a freshman Republican in the Senate, it is incredibly difficult to buck your leadership. Incredibly difficult. And I think on most issues, the question for voters in the 1st District is, do you want a 10th vote in an effective and responsible minority that is not going to be unduly obstructionist, but will make sure that we don't go too far to the right? Or do you just want the 25th or 26th yes vote on most of the agenda that's already going to pass anyway, but that could really make the difference on some of the issues that really divide us?
And just so some of our listeners know, and I'm not taking sides on this, but this particular election could be very crucial on this because you have several major donors in the state who have been putting a lot of money into the primary and now into the general. I mean, these are donors who are in favor of right to work. And there's another issue on the ballot that we're doing a separate podcast on about the proposed amendment to restrict campaign donations. That would not affect this election, but could affect afterwards. A lot of people feel that there's a lot of extra money being poured into these elections because this may be the last time that those major donors can have such a large financial impact directly into individual races. This is just a backdrop. I'm just explaining why there is a lot of attention on it in this election.
So, I mean, with that backdrop in place, how are you kind of navigating what could be a tough election for you in a tough district where an opponent may have a lot of money being spent against you?
We do it the same way we've always done it. We work hard every day. We knock on doors. We talk to voters. We hear what their concerns are, and we do what we need to do to make sure that we are able to at least answer in the mailbox and on the airwaves. But I'm, it was a long, hot summer, and I was out just about every day hearing what concerns are on the minds of the people that I represent in Jefferson City.
And what did you hear? What are their key concerns?
You still hear a lot of concern about jobs in the economy. I mean, we're not in the heart of the downturn where we were when I first ran for the legislature in 2010, where every single day I was talking to somebody who was either unemployed or had an immediate family member who was. But there's still a lot of concern about that. A lot of concern about education and trying to make sure that our public schools can continue to prepare students for the future, and a lot of concern about public safety, and that includes firearms policy. I get asked about that a lot. We passed a gun bill this year that I strongly opposed, that law enforcement strongly opposed. I will tell you, I was at the procession for Officer Snyder this morning, and the woman I was standing next to has an ownership interest in one of the gun stores around. She strongly opposed this year's gun bill because it removed safety and training requirements for people to conceal and carry. I mean, you've got gun vendors who don't like this legislation, and my constituents are concerned about it. I get asked about it a lot.
Now, what do you see as the key issues between you and Randy Jotty?
Well, there are several. I think at the end of the day, he comes down at a different place on guns. I think he comes down at a different place on right to work, and then there's women's rights and reproductive rights and SGR 39, LGBT equality. He is a self-branded socially conservative Republican who is unwilling to compromise on what the Supreme Court has recognized to be a woman's right to choose for herself. And, takes it to a place that's a lot farther than a lot of people who would just say that they're against abortion. Mm-hmm. And those are bright line contrasts.
It's interesting, and we've talked about this before, but there have been prior Democratic candidates in the 1st District who were socially conservative and de-emphasized what you were just saying. You have not ever done that. I think you basically campaigned on what you believe, even if it may not be in line with everybody in the district. I mean, is that an accurate philosophy, what I just explained?
I believe women should make their own decisions and government should not make them for them.
I mean, it seems like this election in particular, a lot of focus, for various reasons, is on women. I mean, from the president on down, presidential contest on down. So my question is, what sort of trickle down do you think that will have on your race, if any?
It's the candid answer is that neither of these candidates are likely to poll ahead of the rest of their party. Both of them are running several points behind the rest of their party right now.
You're talking Clinton and Trump.
Yeah, but both presidential candidates, and neither are terribly popular in my district. That's just reality. I'm a very strong very strong and very proud Hillary Clinton supporter, but I think Donald Trump's disapproval rating in my district is something like 58%.
Really? Now, see, that's interesting because the first district takes in a lot of South County territory that Republicans had been relying on to be as places where a lot of Trump supporters, particularly we're talking middle class, working class men, white men, in South County and in Jefferson County, that they're hoping that's going to propel some of the races like your own, but also on a state level. I'm just interested, since you've been going door to door, what are you hearing?
Look, if it wasn't obvious before last week with the revelation from the hot mic and all that, it's very clear now. Donald Trump is too extreme for my constituency. He just is. I mean, he'll certainly have some supporters, but he would take us to a place that my voters in my district don't want to go. On the other side of the equation, you have Secretary Clinton, who I have to say, I mean, I turned 18 in 1992. I didn't know what a Democratic president looked like. I mean, I still, the first election I ever remember was the day that Reagan defeated Carter. That's the first election I have any recollection of at all. I was in first grade. I mean, my son is older now than I was then.
I'm glad you reinforced that. In 1980, I was actually... Missouri was a bellwether state, and I was actually already working at the Post-Dispatch and dealing with that race.
But the point is, I started college in 1992. It was the first race I got to vote in, and for the 8 years that ensued, I also saw a balanced budget for the first time in my lifetime. I saw a very positive global environment. We saw basically an economic revolution with the advent of the internet and all that brought to change commerce and all that did to grow the economy. We saw some really great times in the 1990s, and I have every confidence that even though I think in many ways now our challenges are greater, perhaps our divisions are even deeper, that Secretary Clinton has an understanding of what it's going to take to lead our country through some very challenging times.
I don't want to overgeneralize here because your district is diverse geographically. It's even diverse ethnically. There's a lot of Bosnians that live there as well. But I've spent a lot of time at St. Louis County Council, and I've had at least 2 or 3 experiences, and one of them you were involved in, where there's been a major development where a lot of South County residents, particularly in Oakville or Melville, come out in droves and just express anger at things. The things that I'm alluding to is either an apartment complex or a senior living facility. And I think that there is this reputation of South St. Louis County people, especially in the unincorporated area, of being very passionate and being at times upset at government when they do things wrong. And I think that that's the reason why maybe there's an assumption that because Donald Trump is also kind of harnessing a lot of frustration with government, and a lot of people in South County often get frustrated with government, that there'd be a natural connection there. How am I wrong?
Well, look, the development you're talking about on Telegraph was out of scale for the community. It was too large. It was right next to another facility. Neighbors were not consulted, and basically the thing got through far enough along in the process before people really even knew what was going on there that people were appropriately upset with it. And that was just, forgive me, bad local zoning and planning. And I certainly don't fault the folks in Oakville who were concerned about that. I was by their side at the county council arguing their case. That's a different thing from what, I hate to say it, what we're seeing at the national level with this Trump guy is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And how much of an impact, though, do you think the turmoil at the top of the ticket is going to have either on your race or statewide?
I think at the moment the wind is at our back. I mean, I think that people are seeing Trump's extremism for what it is. An unprecedented number of Republicans have spoken out publicly against him, not just at the national level, but we're seeing it locally now. I mean, Congresswoman Ann Wagner and I don't agree on everything, but both of us agree that we don't want to see Donald Trump as our next president, or at least she can't support him. So I think that the consensus is growing that Donald Trump is just not the direction our country needs to go in.
Now, obviously, you're focusing on your race right now, but there's also all the Democratic statewide candidates that could affect your abilities in the Senate, whether it be Chris Koster in the governor's mansion or even Russ Carnahan as lieutenant governor. There is a possibility that if you have a Democratic lieutenant governor, that may help your cause there. How do you see the rest of the ticket doing based off the national environment and basically based on how they're organized at the moment?
It's interesting, Jason. I actually caught a glimpse online the other night of your interview with Congressman Jason Smith after the debate on Sunday, and he made the point, and it's a very good one, that in 2012 you had Missourians vote for Mitt Romney for president, and Republican Mitt Romney for president, Democrat Claire McCaskill for U.S. Senate, Democrat Jay Nixon for governor, and Republican Peter Kinder for lieutenant governor, splitting the top two lines on both the federal and statewide races. And so in that regard, I would say that I think Missourians, at least at the margins, and I think deeper than that, are going to make the call based on the candidates more than the parties. Certainly a number of people will vote the party, but I think my district is one where people vote the candidate more. Chris Koster is running a great race. Chris Koster has done a fantastic job as Attorney General now for 8 years, and I expect that he is going to win handily November 8th, and I anticipate that Russ Carnahan will as well.
I want to ask about, I know we always talk about governor more than lieutenant governor, but if you do have a Democratic lieutenant governor, there is an assumption that he may provide kind of a check against the Republican majority by the fact that he is also the presiding officer of the Senate. Right. Now, this is probably more detailed than our listeners care to know, but the current lieutenant governor, Peter Kinder, he's a Republican. He's a Republican, and since the Senate is Republican, he often hands off to other Republicans to preside. So it really hasn't been a major issue with that. Do you anticipate that could be beneficial to someone like you if he is lieutenant governor?
Yeah, I anticipate that he would. And to be clear, Governor Kinder has presided most days in the Senate, at least to some extent. But it matters who presides. I think that we have seen fair umpiring from the dais for the most part in the Senate. But believe me, if I think I don't see it, I'll be the first person that people hear that from if there's a concern with it. But I think for the most part, there's been an effort by the majority to at least have a fair floor, and I appreciate that. I think that Democrats have largely enjoyed a fair floor in the Senate in my time there, with a couple of moments that none of us are proud of notwithstanding. Congressman Carnahan, I believe, will make a fantastic lieutenant governor. I think he'll bring to the process the same fair floor that we've seen. I do think again, it's those moments where we can't agree to disagree, where it really matters who's presiding, to make sure that the rights of the minority are preserved, not abused, but preserved.
Do you think he'll get bored presiding so much?
I would not describe Missouri Senate proceedings as boring.
That was not a serious question.
Well, in fact, I was going to ask you. I mean, here you are going into your, seeking a second term. You briefly were running for Missouri Attorney General, but looking at the Senate now, if you're talking to someone about why you want to be reelected, what is it that you believe you bring to the chamber, and what do you think is most important about the chamber? I mean,
sure. One I'm going to talk about what we've gotten done in the Senate in a minute here, but I will say one thing I'll bring, frankly, is a law license with some experience behind it. Today, there are 3 practicing lawyers in the Missouri Senate. The other 2 are leaving, and if I'm not back, depending on what happens in Columbia, there's a very real chance that you may not have a single practicing attorney in the Missouri Senate next year. And I don't think we should have 34, but I don't think we should have 0 either. but as far as what we've gotten accomplished and what we hope to accomplish, the answer is a lot. The majority of my legislation begins with conversations with constituents. I had a mother approach me a couple of years back who was concerned about her son getting the help he needed for dyslexia in the local school. And this mother was really, really frustrated. And, of course, as events subsequently shown, had a whole lot of other parents with the same experience who were also very frustrated. And we didn't pass a bill to address that issue. We passed 4. So we now have a statewide dyslexia coordinator, the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, who coordinates 525 school districts' policies and efforts on dyslexia education. We've passed comprehensive statewide screening for children at a critical juncture in their education. And we now have a legislative task force that's going to look at ways we can try to provide the services they need in a way that's as cost-effective as possible. But there have been others. I mean, Jason, I saw you mention this morning, you saw that we have our first ad up.
Yes.
Another similar situation. Those parents lost their son at an area daycare in his sleep, and both they and the child's grandmother approached me, showed me the report from the department on what had happened, the investigation of what had happened with their son's death, and they were determined to get something done to try to make this a safer state for infant children to sleep in a daycare, and we got that done. Today, our state's daycares have to adhere to American Academy of Pediatrics Safe Sleep Guidelines. We made that happen. It was filed it as a bill. Was able to get it across the finish line as an amendment to another senator's bill. We got this year in my own name. We got a bill passed to modernize child support enforcement. So I've focused. I mean, I'm a father of 2 young children. We've focused on family and children issues, and of course education. Between my background on the school board and also what has happened with the state's school transfer law and the Supreme Court decision interpreting that, it's impacted my constituents in Melville and Kirkwood most directly with Riverview, but has the potential, depending on what the future holds for the public schools in the city of St. Louis, to impact every constituent that I represent and every school district that I represent directly. And so we've worked very hard across the aisle. We've come up with 2, I think, very fair bipartisan compromises on school on the school transfer law. We have not been able to secure a gubernatorial signature yet. I'm optimistic that hopefully we can next year.
That'll be my final question, because there is an assumption that, although he told me that he's opposed to vouchers and he's not a proponent of school choice, Attorney General Koster,
who is the Democratic nominee for governor,
there is an assumption that he may be more flexible on that school transfer bill than Governor Nixon was, even though, again, it's not like Koster is a proponent of vouchers or anything like that. What's kind of your thought on that?
Well, to be clear, I didn't like everything that was in the bill. There were in one there was charter language, and in another there was voucher language that I had the same objections to.
And
as
that's
the governor.
what I was referring to.
Yeah.
It was a provision that would have allowed someone to transfer to a non-sectarian private school. But continue.
To be clear, non-sectarian private school within unaccredited districts,
right.
Only, not within, for instance, the school districts that I represent. But the point is, I had that objection to the bill as well. From the risk-benefit analysis for my first state Senate district, we needed that bill to become law. The governors have to have a broader point of view. I've got 182,000 people whose interest I have to put ahead of the other 5.8 million Missourians if they're in conflict. And on that bill, my constituents needed something done, and I will continue to work with senators across the aisle and whoever our next governor is to make sure that we have a policy that works for all children, including children, especially children in unaccredited districts who need better educational options than they have today, but also for children in receiving districts who have concerns at stake as well.
Very good, and we appreciate you coming back on the show. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
And how would people find out more about your campaign, either on social media or otherwise?
Sure. The website is scottsifton.com. The Twitter handle, which you advised me of initially is at Scott Sifton, and we also have a Facebook page.
Thank you very much. Until next time, so long.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.